If you want to say a few words first, Erin, before I
Sure,
take
yeah.
off.
Yeah, I just had to bring everybody in. So welcome everyone. I appreciate you joining us today. This is our second spring webinar in our online teaching series, Effective Online Discussions. And joining us to present this information today is my colleague, Rob Piorkowski. If you are interested in any of our past webinars or in viewing the recordings, I will post that link for you in the chat. Rob is also going to share with you from a folder of resources, and I'll put that link in the chat as well so that you can follow along with Rob as he presents today. So with that, Rob, I'll pass it along to you. And I do encourage folks, if you have questions as we go, please pop them in the chat. We'll be happy to address those as we move along. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Thanks so much, Erin. As Erin mentioned, my name's Rob Piorkowski, and I am an instructional designer. My official title is Assistant Director. I've been an instructional designer for a very long time here at SUNY, and I'm here to talk to you today about effective online discussions. So in addition to being an instructional designer, I'm also a former online faculty member from Cayuga Community College. And but let's dig into discussions, because discussions are often are used very effectively across SUNY in online classes and online programs, and they're used in all different ways by your fellow instructors. So just want to dig in and show you some of the best practices that we've been promoting for quite a while now. Some of which you may be aware, and some others perhaps not. This presentation today is going to be essentially in two parts. The first part, I have about 12 slides to share with you. Just on the strategies in using discussions. And then I intend to go into Brightspace, because most of us are now in the Brightspace environment, or soon will be, and show you how to set up discussions and some of the features that Brightspace offers to set up discussions. I am going to enable captioning. So I believe here, as soon as I allow it to access my microphone, we will use captioning. This is a Google slide presentation. If you have never seen one, you can see that the captioning is relatively accurate and forces me to eliminate some of the crutch words that I tend to lean on. Okay. And I try to do my best not to read slides word for word. So you may catch me on that one. But as this slide, sort of promotes, I do believe that discussions, online discussions in particular, offer a real, sort of departure from traditional teaching, in that we have this opportunity to evaluate and monitor the collaborative behaviors of our students in an online classroom. Because everything is online and is readily accessible to us, not only to look at for the first time, but to review in the assessment process, we do have this sort of added power as instructors to both monitor and evaluate the interaction between students. And if set up properly, an online discussion can be a forum in which students actually create knowledge, add to what they've already been reading, pull resources in from external websites and external types of readings and those kinds of things, and can really be a very rich and satisfying environment. for you to evaluate and to see their critical thinking in play. A lot of it has to do with the setup. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about designing an effective online discussion, because what we want to avoid is just throwing students in and asking them to discuss. Since online discussions are relatively new to pedagogy, andragogy in general, um, this notion of again, monitoring and evaluating interactions between students rather than their their ability to produce something for us, like an assignment. um, what we are looking at is really collaborative behaviors. And so that takes a little bit of finesse in setting it up in terms of being clear about our expectations for students. So that clarity is really key to creating a fruitful instructional activity for students. And so, what I'm going to propose to you is what I call the two-part prompt. And before we get into that, in the spirit of being as clear as possible to students, what we want to do is communicate our expectations um, very clearly, and perhaps you know uh, ver- uh, with a bit of redundancy, to remind them over and over again as to what we're expecting from them in the discussions. um, a lot of students tend to think that discussions are inviting their opinions, and some do. But other types of discussions, require them perhaps to do a little bit of research, perhaps to form their ideas in a somewhat formal way, because there you have fellow instructors across the state requiring students to avoid something like text and chat sort of quality of communicating, and asking students to elevate their discussion entries to formal standard written English, and form their ideas very carefully. So, what you want to think about when you're designing a discussion are, what are your expectations, and try to be as clear as possible to students as to what you expect from them. A lot of times, the what you want to include is like a word count for the initial prompt, because some of the let's say overachieving students will write a full-blown essay, where that's not that's not particularly necessary. So things like word count, I guess what I'm getting at are guidelines. You want clear guidelines for students. So things like, if you want them in the initial prompt in a discussion, if you want students to hit on several points, make sure you're very explicit about those points, and what you want from them. Uh, you do want to explain to students too that discussions, because they're going to take students time, they're going to take considerable time. You want to be clear about where discussions fit in the grading process. So where they fit in the overall grade schema, as the slide says. And just two other things. Again, about setting up a discussion, I recommend a two-part prompt. The first will instruct the students around your expectations for their initial response. And then the second will be guidelines of how they should collaborate with each other, how they should respond to each other's submissions. So let's dig into this a little bit. The initial prompt in a discussion does not have to be a question. It very often is a question, but as you'll see in a few of the examples that I include here, the initial prompt can be simply tasking a student with something. Uh, excuse me. There are lots of online discussions going on right now where students peer review each other's work because online discussions um, allow for students to add attachments. Students can add any kind of file into a discussion. So a lot of online discussions are used for peer review. And again, if you envision a peer review process going on in your class as a gradable activity, what you'd want to do is provide students with pretty clear guidelines as to how to peer review, and not assume that every student knows how to do that effectively. So and then, as I mentioned with the two-part prompt, the second part of that prompt should be what your expectations are in how students will um, respond to each other. And so let me show you an example. I have just a little bit of useful text here. And again, this presentation is will be available to you, will be made available to you in whole. And this recording will as well. And I snagged this from an instructor a long time ago, in terms of one of the when we first started promoting online discussions in instruction, we we came up against, after our initial wave of instructors started using online discussions, a lot of instructors, said that there are some students that come in at the last minute in a discussion and will simply put in all their responses at once. So so to ensure consistent participation, I recommend something along these lines in terms of designing for consistency, or regular participation in a discussion. A discussion usually lasts about 10 days to 2 weeks. Sometimes in summer courses or compressed courses, that time frame is shorter. Um, but it takes time for students to put in some meaningful submissions. And so we have this text here that sort of guides students to participate in a discussion at regular intervals. So give them requirements for time requirements for responding to the initial prompt, and then time requirements for responding to each other. Notice that the language here is generic and can be easily applied within any time frame, in terms of I'm not putting in June 2nd to June 16th. So these could be this text could be included in the general uh, directions for discussions, which I do recommend in your course information section, that you tell students in your syllabus, that you tell students that discussions will play a role in this course and will be a gradable activity, along with assignments and anything else that you have them do. And that you perhaps reiterate this right before a discussion as well. As we know, in effective design in in online courses includes redundancy. When if students get useful information right before they're about to do an activity, all the better. If that information is repeated from before, we don't want to assume that they've more or less memorized all of the guidelines that we've put forth in the syllabus. So feel free to repeat these instructions as needed. And just a few uses of discussion. If you're thinking, oh well, how would I use discussions in my class? Here are just a few recommendations in terms of the types of activities that invite student-to-student interaction. Um, we do know that students interact very deeply with each other. They interact with our assignments, they interact with our readings, but when they get to interact with each other, there's a depth there that is palpable. And essentially what we want to see is critical thinking. So any guidelines that you can offer up to students to promote critical thinking in discussions um, will will render a very student-centered activity. And again, a lot of the design work is put into thinking about and then clarifying your expectations for students in terms of performance in a discussion. So just to show you an example of a two-part prompt, this is from an instructional designer course I set up a long time ago. I don't expect you to read the whole thing, but I do want to sort of point out, just the design here. So I have a setup here, okay, and then so the setup is um, uh, how is that faculty are often faced um, with drilling down to helping students drill down into um, uh, how to effectively, in this case, how to effectively address a question like, how do I teach math in an online course? How do I get students to work together in an online course? So here that I've sort of set it up in a few paragraphs here. But again, I want you to pay attention to the design here. The two parts are create an initial post, and I'm very explicit about my expectations for students. I want them to create questions in this post. So notice that I'm not asking them a question. I am tasking them with creating questions. And then here, I want to be very explicit about how they are to respond, in this case, to their colleagues. Um, so add a question or two, provide an appropriate response to one of the questions, or help colleagues refine their responses to questions. I give them essentially three different types of strategies that would earn full credit. And so again, what I really want to, sort of promote here is the two-part prompt. Here's another one where I have them select from a list of different workshop attributes. And then I want them for each choice to write 2 or 3 sentences. That's for their initial post. And then for their second post, I tell them to respond to at least 3 of their colleagues, classmates, and I do recommend text along these lines. Below are some examples of replies that will earn full credit. So so sharing additional ideas, relating an experience, or asking a probing question. This is what I'm sort of getting at. This is what I want to see happen in my discussion. So I encourage you to sort of, reach deep down and figure out what do you want to see them do. And even more, to the point, I suppose, is think about what professionals in your discipline do when they communicate with each other or collaborate with each other. Um, if you can get students to emulate those behaviors, you're probably, very much on track to creating a very authentic assessment. And students feel that too. So asking questions of yourself about how do biologists collaborate? How do philosophers, economists, accountants, how do they collaborate and what do they collaborate on? If you can get some kind of activity, along those lines happening in your online course, students will notice it immediately because there's salience, to the professional world of the discipline. Um, but I think you'll like it too because, um, essentially what we're grading here in discussions is behaviors, not just product. Um, so we're not just assessing whether students understood the chapter or anything like that. We're assessing their collaborative skills because they are always in play in discussions. One last thing here that I'd like to sort of point out is the wording of below are some examples of replies that will earn full credit. You can distinguish between credit-bearing replies and non-credit-bearing replies. And what I mean by that is, um, and as you'll see, the actual mechanics of Brightspace will allow for this, that we can allow, very social back and forth in a discussion without granting credit for it. So you can allow for students to say, yes, I agree, or yeah, that's a great answer, or something like that. They don't necessarily have to be credit bearing interactions. So we can be very explicit about what will earn credit and what does not earn credit.
Rob,
And yeah,
just before you get into the rubric, and you may address this as part of that too, but there's a question from John about what happens if students do or do not respond to all students replying in their initial thread, and the scoring method. So maybe you could address that as you talk about.
so what happens when a student doesn't participate? Is that
I mean, essentially, so they're not responding to the replies to their initial thread,
Oh, I see.
right?
Well, there are a few things we can do, and I'll talk a little bit about how to manage a discussion because that does get into the management a little bit. Um, but essentially, especially at the beginning, some of these online discussions may require that students the instructor needs to intervene and push students a little bit to participate, because for some students this might be the first time they're ever participating in an online discussion. But just like handing in an assignment, you know, um, we need to sort of stress the importance, both in perhaps communicating, again, the grading schema and how discussions play an important role there, but also that the time element of a particular discussion, in other words, relating to those guidelines that I mentioned before, whereby students need to participate, different than an assignment that's due on a specific date. Students need to participate at regular intervals in their online discussion, and those intervals are hopefully spelled out for them. So, and they may have to be reiterated because, online discussions, again, a little different, more akin to like a group activity, a guided group activity than, just a straight ahead assignment that has a single due date. So, also, just mentioning the role of the instructor, the role of the instructor is to, guide the discussion. That does not mean that you want to reply to every single student um, when they come into a discussion, but you do want to be present in the discussion and help students along. So again, in the initial discussions, that might take a little more work on the part of the instructor in terms of prompting students into the discussion and getting them to participate. And I do recommend using rubrics for discussions because rubrics clarify the expectations. They reinforce those expectations in the grading process, and they also provide very meaningful feedback um, in um, in terms of communicating to students where their strengths are and where their weaknesses are in terms of exhibiting those collaboration skills that we talked about, in terms of following the guidelines that are set forth by the instructor. Um, so um, I'll show you how to use the rubrics. There are lots of rubrics out there. In the link that Aaron provided, there are a few discussion rubrics for you to use. But every time I go into Google and I research a particular rubric, like I'll look at a discussion rubric for um, uh, it, economy 101. I invariably get a million hits. So there's lots and lots of rubrics out there for you to essentially view and use for ideas. But as we'll see when I go into Brightspace, a rubric can't be copy pasted and used in the LMS. It needs to be created, and once you're in the creation process, you could, with permission, you might be able to copy paste, but rubrics go a very long way in helping us instructors and students be on the same exact playing field in terms of the criteria we are looking for in their performance in discussions, as well as they expedite the grading process significantly. So rubrics are a little bit of upfront work, but very much worth the effort over the long run, because they really serve us and the students quite effectively. So let's jump into Brightspace, and while I'm doing that, I'd like to take any more questions that have come up. I'm wondering if there are just any general questions about discussions and designing them, because since again, most of us are in Brightspace or will be in Brightspace, I do want to show you some of the features here. And uh, many of us are coming from Blackboard, so I will sort of be making comparisons between Brightspace and Blackboard as we go through. In Brightspace, there discussions are created in their own section. And what I mean by that is that there's a discussions area in Brightspace, and that is where we have the full suite of editing tools to create discussions. Now, in the in my training course here, I have lots of examples to show you, and I'll point out a few things, and then I'll create a new discussion and show you how that works. So in my interface of Brightspace, yours might have an actual discussions link on this mini navigation bar. But for me, my discussions link is under the course activities button. So again, this link might be part of this navigation bar for you. But overall, what we want to do in Brightspace is we want to go into the discussions area. As you can see, I'm here now. And I have lots of discussions that have been pulled over from my Blackboard course. So in other words, I migrated my content, and that content came over here. And it's worth showing you how that comes over, because it illustrates a very sort of clear distinction between how Brightspace sets up its discussions and how Blackboard does. And what I mean by that is, perhaps if I click on this new button, you'll see two terms here that are key to understanding how discussions work in Brightspace. In Brightspace, they have the word forum. Now, a forum is essentially a heading title. A forum is a heading title that can include several different topics. So Brightspace by design is set up for us to create one forum and then several different discussions under that main heading title. And I'll show you what this means in a second. But let me make this distinction here, because a forum is a heading title and a topic is the actual graded activity. A discussion topic is what we are more used to in terms of creating an activity for students. So the topic is the gradable activity. The discussion forum is the overall heading. So let me show you how a few things have come over from Blackboard. I have a meet your classmates discussion, very common, that I include in my icebreaker activities. That came over from Blackboard. You'll notice this is the forum name, the overall heading, and this is the topic. So I'm showing you this because I'd like to, just to understand, same with talk with the professor. I have a talk with the professor, a discussion. The overall heading is included, and here is the actual topic, the actual activity. I'm a former French instructor, so you'll see a lot of French in my training course here. Again, just one more illustration of how the forum comes over and the topic comes over, and they both have the same name. This is how things come over from Blackboard. So let me show you a few, one where it's different. Pardon my scrolling. So here I created a forum called French pastries. And then I created a topic underneath it, essential skills needed to bake French pastries. So I just want to make that distinction because for some of us, this can be a little bit different. So the forum is the heading title. The topic is the gradable activity. So let me show you how we set these things up. Sorry about the scrolling. But in Brightspace, I'm in the discussions area. And so if I create a new forum, you'll notice that I'm going to give it a title, like since we're doing, I'll give it our workshop title here, Effective Online Discussions. And so I'm creating this form, and again, this is not the gradable activity, so it's not going to ask me about how do I want this graded or anything like that. I'm going to show you that when I create the topic under this forum, then it asks me all that information. And so I can put in a description here. And I'm going to put in just a little bit of text here. And then I have, again, for this heading title and any topic that falls under this heading title, I have a few options here. And let me show you some of the options. I can allow anonymous posts, which yeah, I think there are a few different applications for this, but on the whole, most of us want our students' names to be present. I can here, this is a very popular feature for an online discussion here. Users must start a thread before they can read and reply to other threads. In other LMSs, this has been called post first. So again, in this forum and any topic that I create in this forum, this will be sort of the default. And another feature, a moderator must approve individual posts. I wouldn't recommend this. Students have the expectation of seeing their post as soon as they create it. And display forum description and topics. I don't feel the need to do that. And just again, a forum is just a heading title. It's just a folder that that the actual graded activities are going to fall in. I can, when I click on restrictions, as Brightspace, by the way, calls whenever we add dates, Brightspace calls them restrictions. And so here I can add a start date and an end date. Interesting with Brightspace is that I have a little bit of nuance here in terms of the control I have. If I choose a start date, I can do with visible with access restricted before the start, visible with submission restricted, or completely hidden before the start. So these are kind of nice in terms of what I'm able to do here in Brightspace, and I have the um, same choices here after the end date. Some instructors like to, close their discussions. Here you can close your discussion, but you can make it visible with submission restricted. So in other words, if you don't want students to submit into the discussion after the end date, you can still make that discussion visible to students and everything inside the discussion visible to students. So that's kind of nice. I also have the option to display this in the calendar. So if some of you are creating a discussion for the first time in Brightspace, what you just watched me do is create a forum. Okay, and again, a forum is a heading title and or a folder in which we are actually going to create the graded activity, which is in Brightspace parlance is called a topic. So I'm just going to, as you can see down here, I have a save and add topic button. I'm going to do that because I want to show you how to create a topic. And just so you can see here, we have a few more features here to pay attention to when we're creating the topic. And again, just want to reiterate, the topic is the gradable activity. Because I have had some instructors, I train lots of instructors in Brightspace, and some of them, as much as I try, they create forums and they say that students aren't seeing my discussions, and we have to revisit it and make sure that they create a topic under their forum. So here I have effective online discussions, and so maybe as a topic, um, one thing I like to do in my online course is create a discussion around their initial impressions of my content. This is usually in the icebreaker module, and I want to know in the context here what their initial impressions are of France and French and that kind of thing. So I usually so I have to create a title, and just as a side note, everything in Brightspace that has an asterisk is a required field. And here is where I would put my full-blown discussion guidelines and or directions for students. So I'm just going to grab that real quick. Um, Let's see where I can just grab it. Okay, I'll just put in extensive instructions. This is where I would put my two-part prompt and get very lengthy with them. And when I drop it into a module, I'll show you why. I put in my two-part prompt here in the topic. And as you can see on this particular topic, I can designate whether I want this to be a post first discussion, as we call it. Users must start a thread before they can read and reply to other threads. I do like that. And let me go through some of the features here in the gradable activity. Again, in Brightspace, it's called a topic, a discussion topic. First of all, I can enable students' abilities to rate each other's posts. And so right off of this first screen, after I put in my instructions and guidelines, I can choose a 5-star rating scheme, an up-down vote, or an upvote only rating scheme. It's not really my style as an instructor to enable this kind of thing. So, but I do want to show you that it's available for students to be able to rate each other. This does not have any effect on the grade book. So it does not feed into the grade book in any way. So it's more of a social media type of functionality. And so that's on this first screen. And as I mentioned before, I have a few things, features to pay attention to up here. And so in creating this topic, if I'm happy with what I have here in terms of my title and my extensive instructions, I will then look at the restrictions. And these are the same as they were for the forum in terms of what I have available to me. First of all, if I know I'm going to be working on this for a while, I can set it as hidden right from the start. But here's again is where I can set my start date and end date and the behaviors for each. Okay. Um, and I can, if I do choose these, I can display it in the calendar. In Brightspace, we have these neat things called release conditions. And just briefly, I'll tell you what those are. Though I'm able to, if I want to, I can set up a series of prerequisites. Students have to get a certain grade on a quiz. Students have to read or interact with a certain amount of documents before this, and I can set up those prerequisites and attach those to this discussion. We see this throughout Brightspace. It is a neat piece of functionality, but I'm not going to use it here. And I can also, Brightspace does a real good job of me being able to set up small group discussions. So if I want students to interact in small groups, I would set up those groups beforehand, and I can allow access to this discussion topic just by a small group. And so that's always available to me as well. And then the other features I need to pay attention to are the assessment features. So this is where I am going to set it up in the grade book. I'm going to treat it as a new grade item because this is a brand new discussion topic. And strangely enough, it does not pull in the name that the title that I've given this. So I have to reiterate the title here, which I'm always sort of surprised by. But this is essentially the gradebook information for this discussion topic. So I can add in a short name. So if this short name is kind of neat because this is just for me, the instructor, and it ensures this is how it will be named in the gradebook. What it does is it ensures that the gradebook column for this will be as skinny as possible. Because as many of us might know, when we peruse a gradebook in an LMS and certainly in Brightspace, that gradebook width is sort of like valuable real estate in that if I can keep everything skinny, I don't have as much scrolling to do in my grade book. So like I can code this something like, module 1, discussion 1, whatever works for me, because as the instructor, I'm the only one who's going to see this. And then again, this is the gradebook information here for this discussion topic. This is where I have to put it into a gradebook category. And this is where I add a point value for this discussion. Brightspace does offer up the ability to set this as a gradable activity that can actually exceed 100 points in this case. And it also allows for extra credit by setting up bonus activities. Neither of those apply to this one here. And I can also, set up the availability here for this is the gradebook availability, how I want students to see this in the gradebook. I can completely hide it, but here I'm just going to save all this info and not hide it. And I do have to put the score in again. And this is where I add a rubric too. And again, just to remind everybody, I'm on the assessment tab of this discussion topic. And so this is where I add a rubric to this discussion. And so when I click add rubric, this is where I have lots of rubrics already in this training course. So if I add the discussion rubric, now there's a rubric attached to this, this graded activity. And the last thing, which I think is, a very compelling feature here, is allow the assessment of individual posts. Now here is where we sort of depart from the Blackboard functionality that many of us may be used to, and we this is an extremely compelling option, even though it's very sort of modest here at the very end of this screen. But if we allow for assessment of individual posts, what this enables me to do as the instructor is provide feedback at regular intervals to my students. So as the discussion is unfolding, I can I can grade posts as they come in. And so essentially what it enables me to do is treat this as a more formative type of activity for students, so that they can see while they're participating in the discussion whether they are meeting the expectations that I've put forward or put forth or not. So I really like being able to assess individual posts. Uh, in regard to what I said before about allowing for non-credit bearing posts, you can, if you get a post that says I agree and has no real substance to it, you can provide feedback on that post, and get students used to sort of tuning into, okay, I'll get credit for posts with substance, and anything that is social in nature is a non-credit bearing post, still welcome in the discussion but not going to earn credit. So I really like the assessment of individual posts, and if we choose this, and by the way, just one other, sort of benefit to that I find of assessing individual posts is that I only have to read them once. And so what that means is as soon as a post comes in, because I'm, as the instructor, I'm pretty clear on my rubric and my guidelines, I can sort of assess that post and more or less be done with it. For those of us who have graded a lot of discussions, we know that we read them over and over again. We read them as they're unfolding. We want to see how students are doing. We want to see how the discussions are going. And usually we wind up reading posts 2 or 3 times. Um, and so I do find this, while they come in kind of fast and furious, I do think they save me time in the grading process, and again provide that formative feedback to students, where they can really use it in terms of modifying their behaviors while they're doing the discussion activity. Um, and then we have a few calculation methods that we can choose here for determining a grade for this discussion. If we assess individual posts, we can choose an average post score, a maximum post score. Um, we have all these. I usually do sum of post scores because I think that again contributes to the formative nature of the activity. So that students can add up on their own, how many posts they've done, how many they need to do in order to get the grade that they want. So I kind of like sum of post scores. And that's really all we need to concern ourselves with. These objectives in Brightspace are not yet set up on the administrative end, so I don't need to go into those. But if I save and close this, I just want to, sort of close the loop on this. I created a discussion in the discussions area, which I mentioned is really the best practice because It's only in this area where we have the full suite of editing tools for any discussion that we create. And very much like Blackboard, sorry, I'm just going to scroll down real quick. Um, when we create something new, it always lands at the bottom of the list of whatever we have in that section. So I just scrolled down real quick down to the bottom of that list. And here again, I just want to reiterate, this is the forum and this is the graded activity. Now, when I want to pull it into one of my modules, sorry about this scrolling, what I want to do here is go back to my course home, and I'm going to go into the module that I want this to, in which I want this discussion to appear. So because it's an initial discussion, I'm going to put it in my icebreaker activities module. And so I open that up. And again, just to close the loop, I choose existing activities. I go into I pull from the discussions area, and I just want to show you, again, it appears at the bottom of the list. When I create this, what we want to do, and so you see the two different titles here, and just, I'm sorry if it's redundant, but Effective Online Discussions was the forum name. Initial Impressions was the actual graded activity. What I want to do is I want to add the forum, and I'll show you why. Because when I add the forum, and I think it puts it, yeah, down at the bottom. When I add the forum, it gives me this one layer of, I can keep the description really short in the forum, so that if I move this up as an example and put it in line with the rest of my content, it does not push everything down, because when I actually click on this, it'll show me the graded activity. And once I'm on this page, this dedicated page, this is where the extensive instructions will roll all the way down the page, and students can read all of the instructions for this. So I recommend for the forum keeping the description short, and then for the actual discussion topic, that we can add the complete instructions. Okay. So now I went through that relatively quickly. I don't have that much time. I want to address your questions. If you have any questions about the second half, Brightspace, or any general questions that you might have.
Sure, Rob, I have quite a few here that have come up, and some
Cool.
folks are giving their suggestions for what they do as well. So
Oh,
there's some
great.
chatter back and forth. But just to get your perspective on some of these, when you were creating the discussion itself, the discussion forum, Susan asked, or she mentioned that she sees the same options appearing under forum as they do under topic, like
Yeah.
anonymous posting and etc. Is there a reason why you would select those options there instead of under the topic?
Yeah. I choose no. There's no reason why. Because I'm not sure what cascades into what. In other words, whether the selections that, because it doesn't appear that when I choose, like, let's say if I choose anonymous posting, that does not seem to cascade into the topics I create under that forum. So I am a little curious as myself as to how that works in Brightspace.
Yeah.
If someone else knows, please feel free to let us know.
Yeah. So also Susan, I think it was Susan as well, asked, do you suggest inputting restrictions under the forum or the topic, or does it matter?
I would do everything under the topic, anything that I considered high stakes, or what was gonna affect students directly. It would be the topic that I would really focus on, because
Mhm.
that is the graded activity.
Thank you. A couple other questions that are maybe more technical. Is it possible to edit the forum settings once it is active? So once students are engaging in it, can you then edit the settings?
What I have seen is that I think a few settings you might be able to,
Mm.
like the dates. like
Mhm.
those, I think you can edit. But what I have seen is that once the grading process is started, you can't switch between post grading individual posts and holistic grading. So
Sure, right.
once a grade has been entered, that's you're sort of stuck in that grading lane.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. And then there were some questions about, maybe breaking up the whole class discussions. So Andrea asked, she's curious if people recommend smaller groups as opposed to a whole class for discussion, and if smaller groups, what's the ideal size?
Right.
She just hasn't found that magic bullet, and some people had different perceptions of what they do, but I'm curious about your thoughts on smaller groups.
Yeah,
Large.
yeah. It's a great question because and here in Brightspace, if you do break students into groups, you can have the same exact discussion. In other words, you can copy and paste um, a discussion topic under the same forum. So in other words, it's easy to have students discussing the same exact thing, but in three separate topics. I want to use my terms correctly. I think the sweet spot is somewhere about 7 or 8 students. I'll let I'm very open to what others have to say about this as well. Um, but you can certainly have too few students. And because discussions do sort of hinge on students interacting with each other, and so I would try to stay like 6 and above, somewhere between 6 and 10 students in a group. But others might, it really depends on the nature of the activity too.
Mhm,
If you want to use discussions as group activities, um, that would sort of dictate, the size of the groups
mhm,
that you'll want. But I do want to say I think it's a great practice to break discussions into smaller groups, especially if you have a large classroom, 20 plus, because that's a lot of submissions for students to sort of sift through on
mhm,
their end and read everybody's submission and stuff. You do also want to be exact about how many the quantity of submission of replies that are necessary to succeed in a discussion, and how many students uh, a given student must reply to.
mhm.
So if you remember, my instructions were you must reply to at least 3 of your classmates and then monitor your own thread.
And so in that same topic, Rob, can you grade replies separately from posts?
Yes, if you choose the uh, grade each post, grade by post uh, feature that I selected on that very last one, on that last screen under this topic. Yes,
Mhm,
replies are graded too.
mhm.
Yeah.
And then to kind of close this out, a couple questions on the feedback. Um, for assessment of individual posts, where do students see the feedback? Does it appear for them on the forum itself or somewhere else in Brightspace? Where do the
Right.
students view that?
So
And yeah, go ahead.
when students click on their grades, so they'll click on grades and then they'll scan across for the actual discussion, and then when they click on the discussion from the grade book, they will see all of your feedback, um, whatever feedback you've replied, even if it's on individual posts as well.
Okay. Okay. And I want to follow up to our previous question about grading replies separately. Christian asked, do the replies get their own grade or is it rolled into the discussion grade?
So it's rolled into the discussion grade.
Mhm,
What I've done in the past is the initial post is usually worth, something like I will do what I've done in the past is whole discussion. If you get 40, if you generate more than 40 points um, with your initial post and your replies, that equals an A. And so usually the initial post takes a little bit more effort, and you want something, you have a few more requirements about the initial post. So I usually make the initial post worth, let's say 10 or 15 points, and then subsequent replies to other people's posts, usually worth fewer points.
Okay. And can you hide the grading feedback until, let's say, like the end of the week, or pick a date?
Yes, you can hide the grading feedback on that screen, that pop-up screen that asks for all the grading information. That's
Mhm.
where you can restrict access to, when the grades, and control when you want the grade to appear for students.
When they're released. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is a great question, right? I don't know if we ever really know, but how do we know if students see the feedback, or do we, or we just assume, right?
Yeah, that is just an eternal question. Now, what you can do is you can require students to, require a metacognitive activity after the fact, and ask them to comment on the feedback that they've received. Um, I think it's a great strategy, but it resonates for some instructors, not for
Mhm.
all.
And I've seen this too with particularly like writing instructors who have given the feedback, and then the students need to incorporate that feedback into their next draft, their next iteration of whatever the tasks are. So, and that's part of it, right? That's part of the
Yeah.
grade, to see that they've used that.
It's a
Um,
classic question though, and a good question, because a lot of times instructors have that same question about midterm and final exams.
right.
We as instructors put a lot of effort into providing salient feedback, and then we worry about it falling into the void.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll end this on our last question here. Question from John: what % of the course grade is normal, or for participating in discussions? And of course, that could vary depending on how you do your course, probably.
Yeah, so John and everybody else, what I like to, when I help faculty, figure out grading schemas, again, it really comes to a series of questions. And the question on this point is usually, how much time am I expecting students to spend in the discussions? So so I try to estimate, how much time, maybe even on a weekly basis, are students, how much time are they going to spend in this discussion, in regard to the time spent in the overall course. And I try to generate a percentage around that, the time element. Um, in a typical 3 credit course, we expect, or at least the Carnegie formula tells us, 9 hours of effort on the part of the student. If using that formula in my 3 credit course, how many of those 9 hours do I envision students spending in discussions? And when I make that calculation, I try to, generate a percentage for, what a particular activity is worth for the final grade.
Yeah, thank you. And Alex put in the workload calculator, which is a great resource to bookmark,
Mm.
also when you're trying to figure this sort of thing out. So, and I do appreciate Alex also put in, and others put in, some additional resources. So if you would like to save the chat, you can do that, and we can include the chat with all of these links in our recording site. We also put resources. But if you'd like to save the chat, underneath at the bottom of the chat box where you would type, there are 3 dots for more, and you can click on that. And the first option is to save the chat, just as a quick FYI. So I just want to thank everyone for your engagement today. And thank you, Rob, for sharing all of this and giving that demonstration too in Brightspace. We do
Thank you,
look
Erin.
forward to seeing you all at another upcoming webinar. And I posted a link to Rob's resources in the chat, as well as to our recordings. And this should be up there just in another day or two. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.